Ah, the Tony Hawk's Pro Skater series. A series that needs no introduction. A series that has seen the highest of highs, but also the lowest of lows. To be fair, I haven't played the majority of releases post-American Wasteland, but we'll just go with the narrative that they are as bad as people say they are. I'm sure I'll find out that for myself later on down the line. Within the series' heyday, not only were these games released on consoles, but they actually had their own individual releases on handheld systems, which I rarely hear anybody speak of considering how popular the console releases were. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater games on the Game Boy Color. I hope you enjoy. There was 3 Tony Hawk's Pro Skater games released for the Game Boy Color. Pro Skater 1, 2 and 3. Like I said in the intro, I don't think I've heard anybody speak about these before. Are they rubbish? Could I be unfolding some hidden gems here? I mean, the earlier console versions were fantastic, always pushing the boundaries, new gameplay mechanics being added each time for a more over-the-top arcadey experience, which is still fun to play to this day. So I'm surprised that these games have flown under my radar for as long as they have. Let's get into the first one, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1. I will never forget the first time playing the console version. Even at the young age I was at the time, it completely blew my mind. Fantastic gameplay, easy controls to pick up and play, and also that fantastic soundtrack which most Tony Hawk's games have. I'm sure I'm in the same camp as a lot of other people when I say, if it wasn't for the Tony Hawk's Pro Skater games, I wouldn't have ever picked up a skateboard in real life. Many of the bands featured in the game's soundtrack I still listen to this day. The cultural impact this game had, given new life to the skateboarding scene, is something we haven't seen since. Don't get me wrong, there were other skateboarding games before this, but I believe time wasn't right given console limitations. Which is a shame because many would say skateboarding peaked in the 80s and into the early 90s. Some of my favourite hardcore punk bands from back then even had songs dedicating to skateboard and even incorporated it into their image. The band Suicidal Tendencies is a great example of this. How much I love this game can even be seen on this channel. The first ever video I uploaded was the first Tony Hawk game on the PlayStation 1, which I urge people not to watch. It's extremely dated now. I had no idea what I was doing, the captured footage looks awful, I was using a SingStar mic to record voiceover, yeah, the whole thing was just a mess. The only reason I have kept it up is because I'm a strong believer in remember where you came from. I hope to one day cover it again though and do it full justice because I believe my writing skills have improved since then along with production value. So back to Tony Hawk's Pro Skater on the Game Boy Color. It was released in March of 2000, 6 months after the release of the console version. Both published by Activision of course, but while the console version was developed by Neversoft, the Game Boy version was taken care of by a Japanese developing company called Natsume, which I have played a game of theirs before in the form of WWF WrestleMania 2000. Which for the most part was alright actually if I'm honest. Obviously not a patch on WrestleMania 2000 for the Nintendo 64, but come on. That's like comparing Belgian beer to British beer. It just isn't fair. Introductions out the way and we're on to the main menu. I really like the layout with bright colours. A complete contrast to the console version which had more of a darker and dingy look to it. I may as well get this out of the way before we get into gameplay. It isn't a direct port, more of an adaptation of the console version. Obviously due to limitations, which I'm not surprised by, the console version was mind-blown for the time, so it's easy to understand why it isn't a direct port. So they have cut the game up into separate game modes to accommodate this. So no going into a level with direct goals to complete like getting a certain score, finding hidden tapes, collecting the letters skate. There are 4 game modes to choose from. Half-pipe mode, tournament mode, link mode, and one-on-one versus computer. Unfortunately only 3 of these modes are available in single player, as link mode was for 2-player via the Game Boy link cable. I'll go more in depth with the other modes though, but first we need to check out the game's playable skaters. Surprisingly it features the exact same selection of skaters which appeared in the console version, those being Tony Hawk, Bob Burnquist, Geoff Rowley, Bucky Lasek, Rune Glifberg, Andrew Reynolds, Kareem Campbell, Chad Muska, Jamie Thomas, and last but not least, Elisa Steamer. The game's skater selection may actually be the only resemblance to the console version, which isn't a bad thing. Along with each of their names being displayed, we also get bars indicating their strengths and weaknesses in their stats. These indicate speed, acceleration, brake and jump, which all play a part in what game mode you are playing. Let's go in order, so let's check out half pipe mode first. Half pipe mode is exactly as it sounds. Pick from the 3 areas available: Burnside, Skate Park and Downtown. Places loosely based in areas found in the console version. So you get a 1 minute time limit to pull off as many tricks as possible, and for every trick executed successfully you will receive points. Sort of like the competitions found in the console version, but unfortunately you aren't competing against anyone. It's more of a high score sort of situation. As you can see here, when I first loaded in I didn't have a clue what I was doing. I was expecting momentum to be made automatically, but no, you have to press in the direction you're going, either left or right, to gain speed to reach higher heights to pull off tricks. It took me a couple of minutes to grasp the fact I was in total control, but once I got the timing down I found myself enjoying this. With the Game Boy only having a D-pad and 2 face buttons, it was easy enough to come to terms with the controls. The B button is used for flip tricks, while the A button is used to pull off grab tricks. Much like the console version, it's incredibly easy to pick up and play. At first I was pulling off single tricks then landing, but before I knew it I found myself mixing the two up into combos. I was restricting myself for so long, only pulling off single moves. I don't know why. Maybe I thought the handheld wasn't capable of registering it? It felt good seeing myself fly up the ramp, execute a heel flip and then straight into a tail grab before landing. The downside though is all skaters have the same set of tricks, so it does become a bit monotonous pretty quickly. And if you're wanting to see all of half pipe in all its glory, you may as well play as Tony Hawk, as he's the only skater available to pull off the legendary 900 trick. There isn't really much more I could talk about here, it's really straightforward. A sort of nod to California games, just with a more updated look for the time I guess. Next up is tournament mode. Pick a skater and go through 5 stages. These include street, park, downtown, harbour and then finishing up in a skate park. This mode will have you up against 3 other skaters trying to gain points that flow over into each round, and the skater with the highest points at the end of stage 5 wins. Each stage plays the same, get from point A to point B. To gain points you have to pull off tricks. There are multiple launch ramps across these stages you can use. For each trick pulled off you will be awarded X amount of points corresponding to said trick. Unfortunately though, when you pull these moves off, instead of seeing an animation in real time when executed, the game stops with a picture of the trick being displayed on screen. Man, this really slows the pace down for a mode that is fairly fast paced. Also, they don't have a good representation of the skater you're playing as when these pictures are displayed on the screen. Elisa Steamer does have her own exclusive photo though. Along with being able to gather points on launch ramps, you can also use objects across the maps to grind on. If you're grinding from object to object, you can pick up some amount of pace, so fast reflexes are needed here. The only issue I found though is with it being as fast paced as this, you need to have quick response times to pull off different kinds of grind tricks. As you can see, it was too fast for me, so I ended up just sticking to the normal grind so I didn't end up bailing. The controls are tight and responsive, so it isn't a gameplay issue. I'm sure if you're a master of this you can pull off a variety of different grinds. I just found it too fast paced, so that's a me issue, not a game issue. You can also gather points by collecting these things found on the ground. The first couple of stages are easy enough with more room to pull off moves, but later stages throw in obstacles. Remember what I just said about the pictures on screen slowing down the pace? Absolutely nothing slows the pace down more than bumping into an obstacle. This can be ball-achingly brutal to watch and regain speed again. There are upgrades you can get for a boost to gain some speed. You start with a set amount and by pressing up twice on the D-pad you get a short boost. So yeah, that's tournament mode. Not really much else to say here apart from if you don't get a podium finish, this happens. So now on to the other modes. Now I know I said this game had 4 different modes, with one being inaccessible for me because it involves the link cable, but the other mode available is one-on-one versus CPU. Terrible name, but you get the gist. It's kind of pointless me covering this mode now because it's more or less what I have already shown you guys in the tournament mode. The only difference here is that you're up against one opponent and you can't pick up those point boosts I spoke about. In fact, it's completely pointless pulling any moves off at all actually, because they don't count for anything in this mode as there are no points to be made. It's more of a race than anything else, let's just say that. All in, I wouldn't say this game is bad, but I wouldn't be in a rush to play it again anytime soon. There doesn't feel like there's any reward for the things you do in this. It just seems like this game was purely made to pass some time when played, because that's all I really got from it. Also, the soundtrack isn't that great either. Obviously with it being on a Game Boy, I wasn't expecting CD quality tunes, but I was kind of expecting maybe short 8-bit loops of tracks found on the console version. Anyway, I do think this game would be somewhat enjoyable against a friend who's as new to this as yourself. With all that being said about the first Tony Hawk game on the Game Boy Color, I hope just like the console versions they improve and innovate even further as they go on. Next up, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2. I know I don't need to say it, but Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 on the PlayStation is an absolute classic. It took what was great from the predecessor and expanded on it greatly. It introduced the manual to the series to keep your combos going for longer, collecting cash to not only progress further in the career mode but to also upgrade stats to gain better equipment. The soundtrack too is absolutely banging, which sort of goes without saying. It's no surprise it's regarded as not only the best game in the series, but also regarded as the greatest PS1 game of all time. I do think it's great however, but the best on the PlayStation 1? I don't think so. So let's get into the Game Boy version. It was released in November of 2000, a couple of months after the PS1 version launched. Developed again by Natsume and published by Activision. Now I'm sure you can tell just from the menu screen alone, but it's really trying to mimic the console version with its looks and presentation. We have a few choices here. Let's jump into career mode first. It has the same cast of skaters from the console version. These include Tony Hawk, Bob Burnquist, Steve Caballero, Kareem Campbell, Rune Glifberg, Eric Costin, Bucky Lasek, Rodney Mullen, Chad Muska, Andrew Reynolds, Geoff Rowley, Elisa Steamer, and Jamie Thomas. 13 skaters in total, the same as the console version, which is impressive. We also have their stats displayed here too. There are 7 stages in total across this game, which some can be found in the version you're probably most familiar with. Much like the console version, we have a list of objectives we must complete to gain cash for progression. Each level has 4 goals you must complete. For the most part they are the same across all levels, but some may have a level specific type goal like do 5 grinds on a helicopter in the hangar, or grind all taxis in my city. Now we've got that out of the way, let's check out gameplay, and to be honest that's where this game does not shine. Everything seemed good up to this point, but when I first got loaded into the level I was not impressed. So basically there are 2 types of levels, ones that are displayed as side scrollers and others that are displayed in this isometric style view. The side scrolling levels I don't have much of an issue with, but the isometric ones on the other hand gave me bother. I'll talk about the side scrolling ones first because for the most part I've kind of enjoyed these. It's pretty straightforward, you can go from one end of the screen and back no issues within the time given. It feels a lot like the half pipe mode from the previous game we spoke of. The controls are slightly different though. To remain in a half pipe in these levels, don't press left or right or this will result in you jumping out of them. It took me a while to grasp this, but once I did I found myself landing some decent tricks. It's easy enough to jump into grinds, and unlike the previous game, seen as it isn't as fast paced as those tournament levels, I found myself being able to pull off different types of grinds. I really thought at this stage, seeing as this was the first level I encountered, was probably the best way to port the game onto a handheld, but when I got to the second level, that opinion completely changed. I found these isometric view levels almost unplayable unfortunately. First I found grinding these taxis impossible. Whenever I'd ollie to grind on them, I'd fly right over them. I then found out if you pressed the directional button in the opposite way you're going, it would slow you down for better precision landing, but I just couldn't grasp this at all. It sort of goes against what I've been used to on the console versions. I also found times when ollieing I wouldn't gain the right amount of height I was after. I ended up pressing up while ollieing once and it looked like I was gaining extra height mid-flight, but I still wasn't able to reach what I was trying to reach for. I quickly found out this was actually me moving slightly to the left or right depending on which direction I was actually moving in. Suppose this is used for trying to jump into grinds, but the depth perception kept throwing me off. It's like I'd be aiming for something to grind on or even ollie to grab a letter in skate and completely miss. The best I can do in these levels was go for the highest score, and even then it was still a bit of a struggle. I then quickly realised this game is just not for me. Perhaps too ambitious for the time maybe? I can give the game credit for each skater having their own individual set of tricks, but when comparing it to the first game I kind of like the idea of the Game Boy games being an extension of the console version rather than a one-to-one copy, as it just doesn't work for me. There is a free mode to practice beating high scores, but if you're like myself and didn't enjoy the gameplay then there's no need to visit this. There's also a photo album mode where you can check out photos of tricks and even print them out using the Game Boy printer. Anyway, with all that being said, it's now time to check out the final game of today's video, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3. Much like the previous game when it comes to console versions, this was a massive step forward in innovation for the series. Not only was it the first Tony Hawk game on the PlayStation 2, but it also included a new trick to keep those combos going even further, that being the revert. This meant you can go from a trick and a half pipe, revert straight into a manual to keep your combo going. This was a complete game changer in terms of gameplay. Now we could literally skate around the whole map without our combos ending. Such a class game. But enough of the console version, because we're here to check out the Game Boy version. The console version was released in October of 2001 and the Game Boy version would release the following month. Developed by Vicarious Visions and published by Activision. I'm already getting the same feel from the previous game, with it feeling like a one-to-one copy from the main menu here. Let's jump into career mode though. There's 13 skaters to choose from. These include Tony Hawk, Steve Caballero, Kareem Campbell, Rune Glifberg, Eric Costin, Bucky Lasik, Bam Margera, Rodney Mullen, Chad Muska, Andrew Reynolds, Geoff Rowley, Elisa Steamer, and Jamie Thomas. Bob Burnquist was not included in any version of Pro Skater 3 due to his likeness being used in ESPN X Games skateboarding. Having Bam Margera join the lineup of skaters was good to see though, made for a great replacement. There are 9 levels in total in this game, all taking inspiration from the console version. We have the usual set of goals per level, get X amount of points, collect skate, along with level specific goals. Everything you'd expect from a pro skater game really. Now on to gameplay. This really did take me a while to wrap my head around. Let me first talk about the things I like about this game. The inclusion of being able to manual is great. Your combos can last longer, meaning you can get a higher score than the previous game. Also, the inclusion of a wider set of tricks to do, both grab and flip tricks, which is great but does come at a cost with everyone having the same trick list. Presentation wise, it looks a lot better and well laid out. Navigation on the other hand is weird. So my main gripe with the previous game was that it was a nightmare to line up grinds on things or even collect items. Here everything is directly in front of the player, but now instead of automatically grinding on something you land on, you now have to press the B button to do so, much like how in the console versions you have to press the correct corresponding button to grind. It just doesn't feel right in this though for some reason, partly due to flip tricks also being tied to the B button. So there was many times I'd be manualing, about to ollie into a grind, but I'd end up performing a flip trick ending my combo with a bail. I just can't seem to get my timing right and it was infuriating during certain moments. It also doesn't help that some of the requirements for high scores are absolutely insane. Like I get the massive rise in high scores for the console version because the revert system was implemented making it a fair challenge, but in this we don't have revert. They only added manualing, so some of these highest score goals are an absolute joke to get. That's like having some of the highest scores in Pro Skater 3 and Pro Skater 2. It would be an insane challenge. I was lucky if I got over 5,000 points in some of these levels. Also, I could barely get a good launch in half pipes. I tried ollieing when I'd get to the peak of a half pipe and 9 times out of 10 I'd end up jumping out of them. The only times I managed to get good height and speed in these half pipes was when I'd done nothing at all, which I found very weird. Also, thankfully they managed to sort out jumping from between foreground and background, because that was also an issue I had with the previous game. Now when you enter into a ramp, press up or down depending on where you want to go next, and that'll take you to either the foreground or background. See them more like lanes. For me though, sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't, especially after what I just said about half pipes. There was occasions I'd try and enter the background and I'd be launched into the air and land with some incredible speed, which then I'd need to stop, turn around and try again. And also, it is brutal to regain speed in this. All in, this game just wasn't for me. I appreciate them sorting some aspects I didn't like from the previous game, but as a whole package, I just don't think it works that great. I think if I could grasp the handling, this would actually be a somewhat fun experience. I like how as you progress by beating goals, you can upgrade your stats, which of course as a whole comes in handy, but it also encourages you to revisit levels to beat goals you couldn't with lower stats. Also, there's no music included, which feels really weird, although I must say the actual sound effects your board makes does sound half decent. If I had to suggest one game out of these three, even with its monotonous nature at times and lack of replayability, I'd go with the first one I covered. I really think they missed a trick by not making these games a fun expansion to the console counterparts instead of trying to make a one-to-one copy. But I will also say, if you can get over the gameplay and spend a bit of time with the last two, you may actually end up liking them more than the first game. Also, I am well aware of 2 of these games having a Game Boy Advance version. In fact, a lot of Tony Hawk's games do, effectively making the Game Boy Color versions the absolute inferior way to experience these games. Are they any good? Who knows? I may cover them one day on the channel. Anyway, that brings me to the end of this video. I'd love to hear your guys' opinions on these games down in the comments, positive or negative. I respond to everyone and really enjoy hearing other people's points of view on games I cover here. If you enjoyed this video, then please give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, then give it a thumbs down. Either way, it lets me know what I'm doing right and what I'm doing wrong. Last but not least, if you really did enjoy this video, please hit the subscribe button. It'd be much appreciated and will also help me reach a wider audience. I also have an Instagram account which I'm going to start posting on again a lot more than what I currently do, so hopefully I can catch you there also. Anyway, with all that being said, I hope you enjoyed, and as always, I'll catch you in the next one. See ya!